Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese, here with my co-host Nick Olson. Nick, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good. We are on the cusp of a new league year, turning over a new leaf. We're less than 1 week away, so that'll kick off free agency. We've already kicked off the QB carousel with Aaron Rodgers news, Russell Wilson. So this is actually a really, really fun time. It's like the NBA trade deadline. I love this time of year, the NFL, just because so much crazy stuff happens, and it's already happened, and I'm sure is going to continue to happen. Like by the time you're listening to this, I'm sure that this will be completely stale. Like Kirk Cousins will be traded, and bananas things will have happened. But we're still going to preview free agency, who's out, who's coming in, what we want to do, how we're going to fix the salary cap. So I'm excited to dig into it.
Yeah. We can only hope that this remains relevant for more than like 12 hours, right? With the way the quarterbacks are coming off the market. I mean, so much stuff has happened in the past 3 days that I forgot Calvin Ridley got suspended for gambling until I saw it earlier today.
Wild 24, 48 hours in the NFL, and it's only getting started. So it's fun stuff.
So Aaron Rodgers staying in Green Bay, obviously that's bad for us, but we got quarterback movement, and really, fortunately, I guess with the Carson Wentz trade for the Vikings, that was to Washington, who it seems unlikely would be interested in Kirk Cousins. So if you're looking for potential trade partners, they're still out there, and the market's hot. So
yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the Rodgers news is interesting. I think it's obviously bad for the Vikings prospects this year, but I think that with a first-year head coach and GM, you're probably not thinking Super Bowl, baby, with the first-year hires. So that's probably fine anyway. And honestly, if it is the reported $200 million, like $140 million guaranteed or something for 4 years for Aaron Rodgers, like the Packers are pulling a Saints right now, where they're like 1 year away from like the Sean Payton retiring, Drew Brees retiring, everybody else going away and being like, good luck. So like they're going to be in actual salary cap hell. They're just pushing it off. So we'll see what happens with the Packers. But yeah, it's tough for this year. And then as far as like the quarterback carousel, Wentz, even with what, $26 million due for him on his salary plus his
$28 million.
$28 million due with salary plus roster bonus. Washington was still willing to give up 2 third-round picks and move down in the second round this year. So people are thirsty for quarterbacks right now. That was with Wentz. Wentz was awful last year.
Carson Wentz is garbage. Like you can justify the Colts version of the trade where they ended up giving a first-round pick if you're like, okay, we can fix Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz just had the guy who had the only chance to fix Carson Wentz, right, with him for the past season, and he wasn't able to do it. So, I don't even know what the thought process is there for Washington, honestly. I guess it's better than Mitch Trubisky.
Yeah, I think Washington's thought process is like, look, we've got old friend Scott Turner running the show, running the offense there. We need somebody with an arm who's able to drive the ball vertically downfield. That's not exactly Kirk Cousins, and Kirk wouldn't be a fit anyway. That's not like Trubisky, or it's probably no longer Cam Newton. So there's just for the kind of, in his prime it would have been Cam Newton, but it's not anymore. So Wentz is one of the few guys I think who actually kind of fits schematically, but at the same time, I don't know, man. That's what you have to settle for. I mean, what stinks is Washington's got such a great roster. So, they're the kind of team that would make sense to try and make a move for a quarterback. But I don't know. I don't really think Wentz is it. So.
Yeah, and they were obviously, this is probably getting too deep in the weeds, but they were obviously also very in on the Russell Wilson trade talks, and I think they offered 3 firsts or something. But once you strike out there, it's kind of downhill from there. Especially when
I do think what the Wentz trade does for the Vikings is it sets a floor, I think, for what the Vikings can get back. I think whatever the Vikings get for Kirk Cousins, and I know he's paid a little bit more, $35 million is what the trading team would take on with Kirk Cousins' salary versus the Commanders taking on $28 million in Wentz's salary and bonus. So there's a $7 million difference, but at the same time, Kirk is a substantially better quarterback. So I think at the very least you're looking at 2 day 3 picks for Kirk Cousins, even if the trading team takes on his full salary. And I think what Russell Wilson does is it puts like an upper cap. Like
Yep.
the Vikings aren't going to do better than Russell Wilson. They're not going to get first and second round picks and a whole bevy and players on top
Yep.
of it. So that's that Kirk Cousins does not win Super Bowls and dominate his division forever. He's not Russell Wilson. So even if I might think he is comparably skilled in some ways or comparably talented, the NFL doesn't see him that way. Plus, Russell Wilson's salary is a little more reasonable because the Seahawks took on more of it with their bonus when they signed him. So, but somewhere in that range is where Cousins is probably going to fall. Probably closer to Wentz than Russell Wilson. But I don't know, man. It's like I said on Twitter, this is a game of musical chairs, and GM's jobs are the line. And so you don't want to be the GM left, without a quarterback. You don't want to be Frank Reich being like, I've been here for a while. The ownership wants results, and my quarterback is Tyrod Taylor.
Yeah.
That's not an ideal situation to be in if you want your job next year. So there's going to be a market.
Yeah, so, and I think, like you said, it sets the ceiling and floor. I mean, I don't think it really changes my expectations all that much. When we talked about Kirk 2 weeks ago, we were thinking, in the range of a first-round pick, maybe a little bit less, maybe you can get some additional. Maybe it's one of those deals like with the past 2 Carson Wentz trades where it's a conditional where if he plays enough or if they make the playoffs or whatever, it upgrades to a first from a second or something like that. So I think the range is probably still the same, although honestly, given the Wentz trade, I'm hoping it's more on the higher end of that range, right? A potential return would be on the higher end of that range than the lower end, because if you're on the lower end, you're getting closer to the Carson Wentz deal, which I don't know what that says about Kirk Cousins and how he's viewed in the NFL, man. But
the good news is there are a lot of teams still that need quarterbacks.
Yeah.
I mean, now the Seahawks and the Colts on top of, the Texans or there's a lot of
the
quarterback
Steelers, the
teams.
Bucks, the Saints.
Steelers, Bucks, Saints. Yeah. So, and there aren't that many quarterbacks left. Like now that Ross and Rodgers their situation has settled, it's like Cousins and then Jimmy G, maybe if you're willing to gamble on Jimmy G plus his surgery, and then it's kind of Mitch Trubisky. So it's slim pickings at this point. So I think the Vikings, if they want to trade Cousins, they have a lot of leverage here because it's kind of like if you don't trade for Kirk Cousins, then you're going to have to settle for like a backup tier quarterback in free agency. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next.
All right.
The other thing that hangs over all this is Deshaun Watson. Who knows if he's going to play in the NFL next year? But he's got his grand jury hearing going on. I think they said they might have a result as early as Friday. The thing about grand juries is, the old joke is you could indict a ham sandwich just because, like, the way grand juries work is it's only the prosecution presenting its case, and prosecutors only bring cases where they think they have enough to say, yeah, let's indict them and move forward with the criminal trial. And the burden of proof for an indictment is just, more likely than not, basically. So it's not like it's not the high bar that you have to like convict somebody. It's just saying, is this worth our time? Is this worth the state's time to look into? So
and at the end of the day, all that means is it pushes any potential Deshaun Watson decision back further if he gets indicted, right? Because obviously he's pretty untradeable, or you can't trade for him until it gets resolved, and in the universe where it gets resolved in his favor, right? Like,
yeah. So I expect, even if he weren't indicted, or even if he got away, which would really surprise me, I think there would still be the question of like the civil cases and NFL exempt list, commissioners exempt list, and all that stuff. That said, I do think he's probably going to wind up getting indicted, and when that happens, Jeff Gladney got caught after he got indicted by a grand jury. So if and when that happens, I think that's going to be a lot of teams stepping back and saying, okay, this guy's off the table. So that's the only other thing. Otherwise, it's like Kirk Cousins is somehow like the most coveted free agent, not free agent, but like teams are going to be desperate for Kirk Cousins. Yeah, they're going to be truly desperate because Kirk Cousins is going to be who they look to. But the alternative is Jameis Winston or Marcus Mariota or Mitch
one
Trubisky,
of the draft quarterbacks. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's get it rolling a little bit here into the Vikings free agency. Obviously the quarterback talk is very relevant for us, right? And that's probably the first thing we're going to hit on here for just salary cap space in general, right? Currently, the NFL salary cap is set at $208 million. There are slight adjustments that go team to team, but I think the Vikings were in the $208-209 million range, so it's really small change either way for what the Vikings are at compared to that $208 million. However, they're currently $15 million over the cap, almost exactly $15 million. It's $15 million, like 9,000 something. So with
they have a little bit of rollover from last year, but most teams don't, because most teams stretch things to the max. Remember, because like revenues plummeted, so the salary cap went way down. So teams just tried to scrape by. So normally, when you'd roll over like 5 million or 10 million or something, this year most teams didn't roll over anything. Same thing with the Vikings. So they've got $216 million in outlays for their top 51. That's the rule that applies. Is only the top 51 players apply during the offseason. So the Vikings will need to shed about $7 million from their cap to get in compliance by 4 p.m.
Well, the thing is, they also have $8 million in dead cap that counts against it. So that's where you get to the 15 million. Because I actually did the exact same thing yesterday, where I was like, wait, we only need to do 7 million, and I thought I big brained it, but then I scrolled down the page, and that Kyle Rudolph June 1st cut last year hurting us a little bit there, but
yeah. And realistically, they probably need to create closer to $20 to $25 million in cap space, just because you need to sign your draft class. That's like $2-3 million in marginal cap space. It's really the first rounders and the second rounders, mostly the first rounders, that actually cost a lot of money, because a lot of the rest of the guys are really cheap, and every single one of them is replacing somebody else on the roster that's $700,000-800,000. So those late round picks don't actually cost that much money in terms of current year salary cap hit, marginal cap hit, but the first rounders do. So you need like $2 million there. You need like two-ish million for the practice squad. Their salaries go up every year. Was one of the big things in the CBA. You need a little bit of room in case you need to sign people in the offseason, or people get injured and you need to settle with them while also signing other people. So $5 million is on the low end of that buffer. So I would say but at least $20 million in cap space they need to create. And that's before they go out and they sign anybody else, or they re-sign any of their own internal free agents.
And that will take, that you have some time once you hit the new league year to kind of work that out, I think, a little bit, just with some adjustments in the season or that sort of thing. But you need the 15 million by the time we get there. And another key point to remember with this 15 million is trades don't help you at this point, because trades can't be processed until the new league year starts, which, by the way, if we haven't mentioned, is next Wednesday. That's the 16th, I believe, if I have that right. Next Wednesday, the 16th. At 4 p.m. Eastern, so 3 p.m. Central. I'm sure a lot of our listeners are in Central, although Nick and I are both in Eastern. But regardless, so trades don't help you. So a theoretical Kirk Cousins trade where you're saving $35 million against the cap, you would still need to make moves beforehand. Now, obviously, if you're making a Kirk Cousins trade, the moves like giving signing bonuses, and there are players that we can give signing bonuses to, and we have enough flexibility there to get us under the cap. Those moves become a lot easier to swallow, right? A Kirk Cousins extension that's agreed to before the league year would give you cap relief. A Danielle Hunter extension would give you cap relief, right? So if we start with Danielle Hunter, he has an $18 million roster bonus that kicks in the third day of the league year, that it would count against the cap, I believe, as it starts. So it's not like we can start under the cap and until the $18 million roster bonus kicks in. We don't kind of have that leeway. If we cut him, we save enough money, I believe, to get under the cap pretty much point blank, or there are very small adjustments that we need to do. So I think that's the first decision, is what's going to happen with Danielle Hunter. And to be honest, on the outside, I don't know if we have enough information to say anything, right? Last year, he was unhappy with his contract. That's why they reworked this. That's why they added that roster bonus in. I don't know where he's at with the status of his contract right now. Obviously, he's also injured, so that's another difficult component of it, right? He tore his pec during the season, and he was having a very good season prior to that. But now it's harder for the Vikings with a new regime to be able to commit to that long term. As I mentioned, there are other options that we can do to get under the cap that doesn't involve doing anything with Danielle Hunter. So we could just sit on it and make other moves, right? Or we could extend him at some very high number, probably north of $20 million a year still. Even with the injury, guys recover from injury very well at this point. Danielle Hunter has a lot of potential. He's still very young for a player in his situation, right? Where he's like a 7-year vet at this point in the NFL. So I think there's enough working in his favor that an extension would probably have to be in the $20+ million a year range. But again, with, signing bonus money and stuff, you can kind of keep that. If you're the Vikings, in your grand scheme of plans, what do you do with Danielle Hunter, Nick?
I think the conversation starts with saying, look, Danielle, this $18 million roster bonus, we can convert to a signing bonus, and then that'll give us $13.5 million in cap space right away, because it just spreads out that $18 million cap space into $4.5 million chunks. So you take on one $4.5 million chunk in 2022, and then you create $13.5 million by spreading the rest of it out to 23 through 2024. So you say, like, look, we can convert it to a salary bonus. I mean, it's just as well for you because you get the money right away either way, but we don't necessarily need to get into a contentious salary negotiation here. I do think, though, probably the best solution for both sides is to tack on like 2 expensive years. Right now he's got void years for 2024 and 2025 when he'll be 30 and 31 years old. I would just offer him like $23 million salaries each of those years. And that way you can back weight his salary. You can make things spread out a little bit more, because right now the salary cap is set to like explode in the next few years as the new TV revenues kick in and the new CBA kicks in. So they should be able to afford a little bit more of a backloaded contract, and I do think that's fair. And I think that's probably what Hunter wants too, is he wants to be paid. Like, the whole thing is he was underpaid for a long, long time. He doesn't have a ton of leverage because of how much time he's missed, but at the same time, he has the leverage of, you guys suck without me. So
yeah,
you kind of need me. So
yeah,
I think there's a win-win contract offer there that would look like an extension that would functionally do a lot of the same thing as a salary to bonus conversion. The reason the Vikings wouldn't want to do a salary to bonus conversion is it gives you a lot less optionality, where you can't cut Hunter. And like if he got injured again, or he suddenly became like this guy that you didn't think was worth rostering, it would be very hard to get out from his contract if you convert it to a bonus, because then all of that becomes dead money the second you cut him. So that's the downside to it. But again, with a guy who's still not old, I mean, he's not young anymore, but he's not old for NFL terms, and he's plays such a valuable position, I think it's worth just tacking on some expensive years at the end. And I do think, he's not going to ask for Joey Bosa money necessarily, or he's not going to expect it. And by the time he's playing these years, assuming, if he's all works out well, $25 million or whatever for a top 10 edge player in 3 years is not going to look that expensive. That's going to get beaten out by a number of other edge players. So I do think that's probably the best scenario for both players. But if that doesn't work, or their agent is testy, or Hunter isn't interested, I think the salary to signing bonus conversion is kind of an obvious way to create cap space.
Yeah, I'm on board with you. Like, personally, I'm extending Hunter. I want him to remain a part of the Minnesota Vikings. We're going to talk about, team needs and that sort of thing. But the edge group, right, the edge rusher group gets very ugly very fast when you remove Danielle Hunter from the team, and that's probably my primary motivation. Like you said, it's easy to do that signing bonus conversion, make that roster bonus into a signing bonus that's part of a new, a reworked deal, I guess, where the 2 years at the end of the contract don't void, and he makes that $20+ million a year for the last couple years, which I think that's probably the best option. But the signing bonus is kind of your emergency backup, right? And it means you don't have to cut him outright, which is the worst option, I would term, right? Like, that's the option I kind of want to avoid.
The other option, maybe to just touch on it quickly, is obviously to trade him, which would create the same amount of space because somebody else would be paying that $18 million roster bonus plus his salary and his workout bonuses and everything. Vikings would have his future signing bonuses accelerate, so it would still create the same amount of like almost $15 million in cap space either way. But I don't love it because you'd be selling low on a really good player that, I think when he was healthy 2 years ago, he'd be worth, a Khalil Mack package. And right now, I don't think you get one first rounder for him just because of how many health questions he has surrounding him. So That's tough, but at the same time, there are teams that desperately need edge help, and I could definitely see the Vikings moving on from Hunter as well. So,
Yep.
especially new regime, you never know. Everybody's as secure, and Jason Canfora had a report out today that like the Vikings are looking to get younger, move on from some of their veterans. So if Hunter's one of them, it would surprise me, but I don't know if it would totally shock me. So that's just another option out
No,
there.
I don't think there are any ties, and I don't think any personnel move would shock me, honestly, on this team, right? Because we don't know where they're going. Our highest paid players are all on the older end, theoretically declining, and there's no ties to them. So it wouldn't surprise me equally, like if any of the guys ended up going. Obviously, the second big question is the Kirk Cousins contract, right? Kirk Cousins, everybody knows this, has a $45 million cap hit in 2022. $10 million of that is signing bonus. You literally cannot do anything about that. The other $35 million is guaranteed salary. The only way you can get that guaranteed, well, there are two ways you can get that guaranteed salary off the books for this year, right? You can extend him, make that part of the signing bonus, and just let it go out into future years. That's kind of what we did back in 2020 when we extended him, right? We relieved our cap a little bit in 2020 by doing that. Or you can trade him, and that gets the $35 million off the book. Obviously, there have to be accompanying moves before that trade to still get yourself under the cap. But then you have $35 million, and you have a lot of money to play with in free agency, right? So those are kind of your two options there. I went on record, a week ago or 2 weeks ago saying I would trade Kirk Cousins under a lot of circumstances, right? Like, I think with the QB market, there has to be somebody offering what I would accept for a Kirk Cousins trade. So that's my personal preference. Nick, I don't know where you're at in terms of where your limit with the market. Do you think you would try to swing a trade, which I think we could easily swing a trade with this market, or are you extending?
Yeah, this goes back so much. I mean, listeners should go back and listen to our Kirk Cousins podcast because that will answer this question a lot more than I can right now. But the short of it is, I think Cousins is a really good quarterback who probably gets a little underrated by a lot of folks. At the same time, though, somebody's going to come along and offer $35 million of cap relief plus like a first rounder. I think you have to take that just given that, like, I think Kirk Cousins is the kind of quarterback who you can insert into a team that's a QB away and really make some noise with. I don't think that's the Vikings roster right now, given
Yep.
the defensive side of the ball and how all their they don't have any good young players on defense. Like their best player under 27 is Cam Dantzler, maybe, who wasn't even a starter really this year.
Yep.
So it's just pretty bleak on the defensive side of the ball. So not to mention the offensive line is still screwy, and Adam Thielen isn't getting younger. So there's questions about this team, and I'm not sure this is the year to go all in with a $45 million quarterback. So I think, given what we've seen, especially recently with the quarterback market, like Aaron Rodgers is going to make Kirk Cousins maybe a little bit more expensive, if anything. And then Russell Wilson, Carson Wentz are going to make the trade offers a little bit more enticing. I think that pushes things a little bit more towards trading Cousins makes sense. And I say this as somebody who thinks Cousins is a good quarterback and who I like, but I do think, if the option is extend Kirk Cousins at $37 million, $38 million a year, you could do that, create a lot of cap space this year, and be able to build around Kirk Cousins long term. I mean, he's not an old quarterback. You don't necessarily have to move on from him. But at the same time, I think this is also probably a good time to hit the reset button, get some additional cap space, free up your roster to retool along, and then get this roster in a place where the quarterback of the future can come in and hopefully have the roster at that point at a time where somebody can slot in and get things going. So, I right now I think trading is probably the best option given the market.
So maybe a little bit more interesting version of the question. How much would you take on in terms of additional for Kirk Cousins' salary? Because I'd easily do $10 million, right, where we only save $25 million. I think once you get past that $10 million range, it gets a little bit harder to keep taking that salary on to move him, right? So like Washington, we said before, is taking on $28 million additional with Wentz. So that kind of gets you in the $25 million, where a team only has to take on $25 million to get Kirk Cousins. And I think that might be a fair compromise if we're getting good compensation for it.
Yeah, it would depend on the draft picks you're getting back. I'll say right now, like 2/3 for Kirk Cousins, and you get all $35 million of his cap off the roster. Like, don't get me wrong, Kirk's a good quarterback, and they're going to need to find a replacement. But like, 2/3 plus $35 million of cap space is a lot. So you could do a lot with all that. So if that's the floor, I just think yes, I would be willing to take on like a $10 million cap hit if it turns like one of those thirds into a first. Absolutely. Kirk Cousins for a first and a third plus $25 million in cap space, that would turn the Vikings into somebody who could actually go out. Granted, they would probably, unless they want to roll with Mond, they probably have to sign, a Jameis Winston so maybe it's not all 25 million of that is actually effective cap space, but at the same time, you could do a lot with that. So I feel like that is something, just where the market is right now. I feel like they're going to get an offer that's going to be really hard to say no to. So
yeah,
that's kind of where I'm at.
So the other thing that the Vikings can possibly do to create cap space is do the signing bonus conversions with other players that are on the team. And there are actually a number of players that is possible to do this with. If you look at Eric Kendrick's contract, you look at Harrison Smith's contract, you look at Adam Thielen's contract, you look at Dalvin Cook's contract, all of those contracts, it's possible to do it. The other way they can create cap space is by cutting any of those players I just mentioned, because they save money on those cuts based on the guaranteed salaries, or Michael Pierce, who's on the last year of his deal and would save about $4.5 million. I personally am not a big fan of the idea of cutting Michael Pierce. If you look at the combination of the contracts between Thielen, Smith, Kendricks, and Cook, with signing bonus extensions, you can get the $15 million. I think personally, and my method here, right, is trade Kirk Cousins, get that $35 million opened up after free agency hits. But before that, you have to take on that additional $15 million. You can live with pushing money into those players out into the future, right? Maybe we don't want Eric Kendricks to play out his contract based on age. Maybe we don't want Adam Thielen or Harrison Smith to fully play out their contract. Dalvin Cook, obviously being a running back, probably isn't worth the value that he's being paid in his contract, right? But at the end of the day, taking maybe bigger dead cap hits into the future on those players, I think is a preferable option to being forced to do something with Danielle Hunter's contract, right? Because that's pretty much your other option. Or cutting Michael Pierce because maybe Michael Pierce isn't quite worth his cap hit or whatever, but you're not going to find a better solution out there in free agency with the money that you save, in my opinion. So it's really
Michael Pierce, when he's healthy, he's a dominant player. He's a top nose tackle, and I think it was the 11th highest graded defensive tackle in the NFL, and he's consistently been at that range when he's healthy, other than the 1 year where his weight ballooned in Baltimore. But I think he's got 3 years of top 15 grades in the NFL. So, and he's a really good player, and his skill set is not replaceable. Like, there aren't players his strength and his functional, he weighs 350 and he plays like the strongest dude in the NFL.
And
so
his leverage is just ridiculous because he weighs 350 and is 6 feet tall.
Yeah, exactly. So, special player, I would not get rid of him. I think they could approach him with him and Thielen. I think are candidates for a pay cut / we give you more guaranteed, but we want to keep you around. So, it's like a pay cut, but it's also, you get more guaranteed money next year. So it can work out for the player as well. So I think that's one thing. I think if they decide they want to build around Kendricks or Brian O'Neill, those salaries can be converted into bonuses, and you're not worried about the dead cap impact or the losing optionality there because you're building these are franchise cornerstone players. You're not going to cut Brian O'Neill, so don't have to worry about that. And some of the other options are like Anthony Barr. Technically, his contract is going to void once the league year starts, which will accelerate his void year bonus dead cap hits. But if they extend him, it will no longer accelerate his 2023 void year bonus. So if they extend him, they'll actually get like an extra $5 million to play with. So if they sign him for 1 year, $5 million, that it'll be like a wash. So
that's actually really an interesting question because. And this is a very technical thing, and I don't think it was actually reported or we know it for Anthony Barr. But there are rules about how much salary can be in a specific year. And you cannot rework a void year deal, or you cannot rework a void year deal to money that's less than what the original contract was in that void year. This is the thing with Taysom Hill, where it was reported he had this $80 million contract over 4 years or something, and it turned out that most of that money was void years. right, in void years. So I'd be interested to see what his theoretical salary for those void years would be. And maybe it's just a weird mechanism where he technically has zero salary and you can extend him for whatever. But the Taysom Hill thing, I remember it because of Taysom Hill, because they could not. It basically meant that if the Saints wanted to keep him on the roster and prevent him from going to free agency, they needed to pay him more money than they put in the contract. So, I don't know. I don't know quite what the deal with Barr is there. I'd be interested to try to figure out how much we can load up, but that's kind of a deep research question that I don't even know if we have access to. So if we want to keep it rolling a little bit here, into team needs, right? So we talked about kind of our options to free up cap space moving forward, and we have a few. Then we need to hunt in free agency, right? Because we're losing quite a few free agents. So I kind of have this broken down into three categories, right? Top priorities, places where we need an investment, but we don't want to break the bank in any suggestion. So that's like, don't spend a first round pick on it. Don't spend a second round pick on it. Don't pay a guy a ton of free agency, but we need a physical body there, right? And then an upgrade would be nice. A position where like we think somebody on the roster can be a starter in that area, but maybe we want to upgrade it a little bit. So I guess for top priorities, right, I think it's obvious. I think it's a really obvious answer, and it's cornerback and edge rusher. Obviously, we talked about the potential for a Kirk Cousins trade. If Kirk Cousins gets traded, quarterback gets up there, but I think that's a draft answer rather than a free agency answer anyway, so I don't think it matters too much. Any argument with cornerback and edge, and do you want to add anything in there?
I would put cornerback on the highest tier.
Yes.
And then edge as the second highest tier. I think they're a tier apart. And the reason I say that is because if Danielle Hunter is healthy, having DJ Wanham as your second defensive end is not ideal. But I can live with DJ Wanham as my second defensive end, and just understanding, like, I think he's a rosterable NFL player. I think he's like a DE3 on like a solid team. So, whereas Chris Boyd is not a startable NFL player.
Absolutely
like, you put him in there, and it's good quarterbacks immediately start targeting him. So, like, Chris Boyd as a starter and Harrison Hand as your nickel, that scares me a lot more than DJ Wanham or Oli Udoh or Cam Bynum. So while I think edge and linebacker and safety and guard are all needs, I think cornerback is number one with a bullet, especially because they don't just need one of them, they need two of them. So corner is first for me, definitely.
Yeah, no, corner is number one with a bullet. We only have 3 on the roster. It's the first point, right? And 2 of those guys are like very bad, and one is Cameron Dantzler, who I don't have a lot of faith in. Edge is higher than the other ones you listed for me, and I made it a top priority, something I want the Vikings to make a significant investment in, because I don't have quite the faith in DJ Wanham that you do. Like, I think he is maybe a rotational piece, but we saw last year, man, I do not want him playing significant snaps on the football field. Like, he is a detriment on the football field. To me. If you flip it over to investment needed, but don't break the bank, right? That's the second list. For me, I have linebacker, because we just lack the guys on the roster. I have safety, and I would also put guard or interior offensive line in general on that list. I think those are the 3 for me. Also, those are the 3.
Yeah, and I think that's the right list. Like I said, I don't want necessarily Oli Udoh to start at right guard, even though I'm kind of intrigued to see if he can continue his development. I mean, and I know he was bad last year, but like going from where he was at Elon to where he was last year, where he was like not the worst guard I've ever seen, is significant progress. So, and he's still young, and we've got a new offensive line coach who's, supposed to be good at developing these guys. So I'm interested in seeing Oli Udoh out there. Still would not feel confident in having him be the number one starter in Penn. So I would like to give him competition or possibly upgrade. Same thing with DJ Wanham, probably even more so with DJ Wanham, because I think at this point we kind of know Wanham is probably not a starting caliber player. And I think, assuming we keep Kendricks, and right now Barr is a free agent, so if it's Troy Dye or Chassarat or whoever it might be at linebacker, that's That's probably even worse of a starter than Wanham or Oli Udo, like Chaz Surratt at linebacker. But at the same time, linebackers don't matter as much, especially as we're transitioning to a 3-4. So I'm not as concerned about that. Cam Bynum, I think, is probably the one I'm the least concerned about, just because I think you can get good safety out of players, and I think Bynum flashed a lot last year, so I'm actually kind of interested to see him starting going forward. So I'm not as panicked. I still think it's worth investing in the position though. So I kind of agree with all those positions of need. I just I rank them differently in terms of how desperate I am.
And in terms of desperation, right? I think like the linebacker situation outside of Kendricks is worse than the edge situation, even considering Wanham. The thing is, I just don't think we need that significant of an investment in it. Like, I would want a starting quality edge rusher, which is a very significant investment in the NFL. Like, that costs a lot of money. You can get a starting quality linebacker pretty much off the street. Right, so that's kind of the difference there. And I think guard and safety, I would also agree with you. I would shout out Wyatt Davis at right guard as potential for competition. I mean, it's the same with Oli Udo. Like, I don't have a ton of faith in him developing, but maybe with the new offensive line coach in there, you get something out of that. But you would still want to bring somebody in to add competition to the room so you can kind of ensure that you're getting a reasonable player out of that room. And Cam Bynum is so much of an unknown that we want to at least add a little bit of competition in there as well. So I think that's good. The third one is, quote unquote, an upgrade would be nice to this spot, right? And to me, center is one of them, unfortunately, with Garrett Bradbury, which we kind of touched on interior offensive line a bit. Tight end is one of them just because of the uncertainty for me in the room there with Irv Smith. And then that, 3-4 defensive end spot is something to me with, Lynch and Armin Watts, who I think probably can fill that role, but maybe we might want to look for something outside of the team. So those are the three main ones for me where I'm like, kind of in the back of my mind, if we add somebody here, it would be like, ooh, that could be a nice piece for us, right?
Yeah, I agree. The only one I would maybe start to think about is wide receiver, just because I think Adam Thielen, you got to start future planning. But once you start thinking about future planning, then you also need to add safety because of Harrison Smith. You need to add defense. You need to add defensive tackle, nose guard because Michael Pierce, Dalvin Tomlinson. So, you need to add another linebacker because of Eric Kendricks. So, yeah, that's. I think that's a good list.
Yeah, absolutely. So. We're going through the needs, obviously, and we're losing a ton of players. We referenced this a little bit earlier. I'm going to read off the list of free agents first, and then I'm just going to kind of go over quick guys I am very interested in bringing back. Obviously, maybe any of these guys you can bring back on minimum contracts or depth pieces as soon as we get to the later ones, but guys who I'm actively trying to reach out for and kind of work out a deal to bring them back. And I don't want to break the bank for any of these guys, right? I don't think we have any tremendous players that are going, but it could be interesting. So Patrick Peterson, number 1, Xavier Woods, number 2, Tyler Conklin, Sheldon Richardson, Mackenzie Alexander, Nick Vigil, Mason Cole. Both our specialists, Greg Joseph and Jordan Berry, are free agents, so that's great. Rashad Hill, D.D. Westbrook, Chris Herndon, fantastic trade, Rick. Thank you very much for that. Luke Stalker, Sean Mannion, Wayne Gallman, I guess, was on the team for a couple weeks, Chad Beebe, and Dakota Dozier, right? So, I mean, obviously we kind of went from priciest to least expensive. I would be interested in trying to bring Patrick Peterson back. I don't know how much that's going to cost. I probably don't want him back at the $9 million figure he was last year. I wouldn't say I would love that, but it's an option to me. Xavier Woods, if he's cheap again, man, I want Xavier Woods back if he's cheap again. I thought he played well enough, and I think he'll be good enough in this system that it doesn't really bother me. Tyler Conklin, I think we're going to get outpriced on. Like, I'd like to bring Tyler Conklin back, but, dude, like, 3 tight ends got franchise tagged. CJ Uzama is supposed to get, like, $8 million a year or something. Or was he one of the ones that got franchise tagged? I think Tyler Conklin's going to get, like, $8 million a year. You can't pay that to it. I can't pay that to him. I wish I could, but I can't. Sheldon kind of interests me as that flex end, but I don't know how he really fits there. Other than that, like, I guess I'm fine with Greg Joseph and Jordan Berry. I guess I'm fine with Rashad Hill as a swing tackle. Nobody else really floats my boat as significant investments on that end.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. I think Patrick Peterson is somebody I definitely want to bring back. It's just a matter of who else was going to want to pay him. And I think how well he played kind of went under the radar a little bit, which probably
Hmm.
works to the Vikings' advantage. I think so. Like PFF, Brad Spielberger at PFF estimated he'd get a 1 year, $6 million contract. I would absolutely sign him for that. So would love to have him back. The other big one is probably Anthony Barr, who kind of doesn't count because he's
Oh yeah,
he's like a
that's why it
void
wasn't on
free
my
agent.
list.
Uh, but I would totally bring back Barr. Woods only played for like barely over vet minimum last year, so I would totally take him back. But I would still think Bynum is the starter, so I wouldn't hate to lose him. Conklin, I think, will get priced out on. Sheldon Richardson, I think, would be very valuable, especially in base packages as like the 4i
Hmm.
or like the 5 tech, kind of similar to what he was doing last year when forced to. So, and he's really valuable on like stunts and games in the pass rush games. So I feel like he would be pretty valuable at the same time. We kind of already have Armin Watts. It's not necessarily the biggest position of need. He's not young, so if it's like $2 million, sure. If somebody's willing to pay him like $5 million, no. Vigil, I no. Well, I mean, he's probably better, I guess, than like the Surratt. So, but if it's like $1 million for vet minimum, yes. Mason Cole for vet minimum, yes. I think he's worth a competition with Bradbury. Joseph Berry, I think, are both worth bringing back, but I don't. I want them each to have competition. Rashad Hill's a valuable swing tackle, especially now that Oli Udo has moved inside to guard. Most of these guys I wouldn't hate bringing back, for vet minimum because it's essentially free
Yep.
because you're replacing somebody else on the roster who's also making $800,000 or whatever. So I'm fine with. Oh, and Mac Alexander, I forgot to mention, but like he wasn't. He was kind of a disaster last year, but at the same time, we need warm bodies at corner. So yeah, I mean, he was a vet minimum last year, so I'd take him back for vet minimum again this year. So most of these guys, I'm not going to say no to. So it's kind of the state of the roster right now. So
Yeah, and that is the one thing is like a lot of these guys are going to be very cheap. Like I don't think many of these guys are commanding significant contracts. Obviously, Tyler Conklin is. Patrick Peterson might because he did play better last year, and I think people around the league recognize that he played pretty solidly last year. So that'll be kind of interesting. Offensive lineman, man, sometimes get ridiculous deals. Remember when Nick Easton got like $6 million a year from the Saints? So for any of the offensive linemen, in the back of my mind, it's like we're gonna have to wait it out to see if somebody's willing to pay somebody a bonkers deal for no reason, like just because that's how it works. So it'll be kind of interesting to see there. But I guess we hit on that a little bit, and it does tie into the free agents that'll be available too, right? So both of our top target in free agency, for the Vikings is going to be cornerback. Obviously, we probably also want to, uh, you know, go after corners in the draft as well. We only have 3 on the roster right now, guys. We're going to need to add at least 3 more, right? Well, we're probably going to need to add, 6 more by the time it gets to training camp, but you want to keep 6 corners on your roster, right? So we're going to need to add 3 more that are rosterable players at the very least. And I think the Patrick Peterson question gets interesting when you compare him to, would you rather have Patrick Peterson or say Kyle Fuller coming over from the Broncos, right? Who knows the Fangio system? And I think that's the question for Patrick Peterson to me is if I can get Kyle Fuller for a similar deal to what I can get Patrick Peterson. And I don't love Kyle Fuller as a player either. I don't think he played particularly great last year. I might choose him over Patrick Peterson, but that's kind of close, right? I would say it's one or the other for him. The other one that's interesting to me from the Broncos is Bryce Callahan. They have a couple of younger players who didn't play all that much that are becoming free agents, but Bryce Callahan is really interesting to me. He was a really good slot corner in the Fangio system with the Bears. He signed a pretty significant contract, and he's dealt with injuries since then. So if you can rekindle some of that, I'm kind of pretty interested in that. Another name that popped out to me was Darius Williams from the Rams. Now he might get a significant contract. Like he's played pretty well, but he also is a smaller guy, and he doesn't really have the reputation that, because Jalen Ramsey's the guy with the reputation in that room. So it'll be kind of interesting to see where he goes. Rasul Douglas played fantastic in the slot for the Packers last year. If you can get a reasonable number on him, that's interesting. The one other name that popped out to me in kind of the bargain bin is Trey Flowers, who was actually a former Seahawks corner. He was with the Bengals last year. That kind of popped out to me in the bargain bin area. There were some other names, like I don't love Eli Apple. The top end of the market is like Stephon Gilmore. Stephon Gilmore might be priced out, but like J.C. Jackson and Carlton Davis, I think the Vikings are just priced out of that. If we free up a significant amount of cap space, I love Carlton Davis. I love J.C. Jackson as capable man corners. But we'd have to free up cap space to do that, to me.
Yeah, it's a good list. I would just say, if there's a place I'm willing to break the bank for here, it's one of these corners. I think this is actually a very, very good free agent cornerback class, which is surprising as the NFL has gone more pass happy and cornerbacks become more and more valuable. So I think, and one thing to remember is, yeah, these guys are going to be expensive, but if you get like a 26-year-old cornerback, you can sign him to a 5-year deal, and his 2022 cap number could be like $3 million, $5 million. You can definitely backload it, make these things work. So, I would be willing to sign on to a gigantic contract for J.C. Jackson, Stephon Gilmore, Carlton Davis. And I like a lot of the other guys you mentioned. I also think Bryce Callahan makes so much sense reuniting with Donatel, his defensive coordinator last year. So he's a really good slot player. I think some of these guys are a little on the older end. I think the other thing that's impressive about this cornerback class is it's a lot of young corners too that are coming out. So I'm would be comfortable doing a long-term deal. I also think it would help the Vikings to not just have 1-year deals for good but older players. The only other guy is maybe Charvarius Ward. I think is an interesting name as well to keep out there. I think he could also be a good starting outside quarterback for the Vikings. So there's a lot of good names, and I hope the Vikings land some of them. So because they need all the help they can get.
I actually strongly considered putting Charvarius Ward on the list, and then I remembered the last Chiefs cornerback where I liked the Vikings signing. That did not work out so well, and I was like, you know what? Maybe but Charvarius Ward is a better player than Bashaud Breeland. He's played better throughout the course of his career than Breeland has. So, it is what it is. I'm going to jump to edge next. We disagreed a little bit on the severity, but I think it was probably number 2 for both of us, just in terms of where we'd be willing to invest. And I kind of went more bargain bin on this list. I didn't really chase after any of the high-end names, and a lot of the high-end names in the market are older too, so it kind of makes it a little bit harder.
Yeah.
But I went with Uchenna Nwosu, who's from the Chargers, has experience in a similar system. Rasheem Green, Jacob Martin, Lorenzo Carter, and Arden Key. Now, Arden Key would be a pass rush specialist only to me. But the other guys are interesting because they have more, and there's a theme with them. They all have like the 3-4 outside linebacker, but with like coverage versatility, I think was kind of the theme with what I went with there. I also added Justin Houston in as an older target. I love Justin Houston. I think Justin Houston's still fantastic. And he was cheap, right? Like a lot of the older guys, you're still spending a lot of money on like a big single year pass rush contract for him. Justin Houston was cheap last year. I think he'll be cheap again this year. So like Jacob Martin has shown a lot of flashes. He was with the Seahawks previously. He did some nice things with the Texans this past year. Now that's not the most ringing endorsement in teams in terms of like their edge rush potential. Rasheem Green kind of played that Leo role for the Seahawks. So he has the experience kind of in the multiple. And Uchenna Nwosu, and Rasheem Green and Uchenna Nwosu, I both remember from the draft, are like super athletes coming out. Like they were fantastic athletes, and that's kind of where I'm chasing the upside there. They're both off of their rookie deals. Now, I don't know what market range they're put in, right? Like I haven't been following it that closely to know. Maybe secretly one of them is going to be like a $9-10+ million a year contract, right, as an edge rusher. But I really think that they'd be bargain bin like mid-range guys to bring in.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting list, and I had the same impression. Like Von Miller, the Chandler Jones, all the other like really expensive free agents probably don't make sense because that's kind of like what the Rams did. We're trading for Von Miller, like get a 1-year guy for your all-in year. That's not where the Vikings are at right now. So I like Nwosu. I like some of these guys. The only other one I would add to the list, and he's not a free agent yet, but he does have a strong Vikings connection. Would be the Packers defensive end, Zadarius Smith.
And the only reason he's not on my list, right, is he's not cut yet. So
he's not cut yet, but I think it's reported that he will be, and the Packers will have to basically. So if his medicals check out, he is a. We signed the Packers outside linebackers coach, and so they have a strong connection. I think when Zadarius Smith when the Vikings hired his outside linebackers coach, he like tweeted out eyeballs emoji. So he has the NFC North connection. He has the Vikings coach connection. So I feel like he would make sense. He's still really good. So maybe, if it's like a 1 year, $12 million contract, can the Vikings afford that? Maybe not. But he's a really, really good player, and he has some inside flexibility as well. So I think he would make a lot of sense for this roster if they wanted to go after an older guy instead.
Yeah, so I guess next let's go to interior offensive line, right? We both agreed that was a place we need to add competition. I saw the other day that the Vikings are pretty in on Laken Tomlinson. Like, that's a name that they've been connected to at this point. He was the guard from the 49ers. Just looking at the list, I don't know if this is a place where I want to break the bank for Brandon Sheriff. Right, I'd rather break the bank. If we're going to free up enough money, I'd rather break the bank in the corner market than I would in the interior offensive line market, right? I think if you talk about this, now on one hand, like cornerbacks and offensive line are kind of position groups where you want no weak links. Like the key is to not have weak links. But I think the high-end corner helps you a little bit more than a single high-end offensive lineman does. Just because, an offensive lineman truly is 1/5. When you have a high-end corner, you can eliminate a larger percentage of the field, I think, than you do with the offensive lineman. So that's kind of my rationale for corner over offensive line there. I don't love breaking bank with Sheriff. James Daniels is on the market. I don't know if he's played great with the Bears, right? I don't think he's lived up to kind of a little bit of the draft hype, but maybe you think he can do something. There are a couple of Rams guys on the market, right, with the Kevin O'Connell connection. Austin Corbett, I think, would be an awesome signing. Their center, Brian Allen, I think his name is also on the market, so he's competition. But I don't know how much it's worth paying that guy to take over for Garrett Bradbury, right? Not that Garrett Bradbury is good by any means, but I think he's okay enough where I'm not trying to pay $9-10 million for a center to replace him. But there are actually, like, it's a great center market. You have Ryan Jensen as well on top of Brian Allen, and there's somebody else big who's coming out. The other big name is Alex Kappa, who I think is going to get a large contract, but I just don't know if he fits what we're looking for on the offensive line because he's a more physical, like, power type of player.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of names out there. The problem is, this is just not a position I want to invest a lot into, and especially compared to the value over replacement. Like we did just draft Wyatt Davis in the 3rd round last year. We did get decent production out of Oli Udoh, and despite how bad he was last year, his arrow was pointing up because he was such a developmental. He basically was only just starting to learn the position when he was drafted. So there's reason to skimp on this position compared to going out there with Chris Boyd at cornerback or DJ Wanham at edge defender. So the only other name I would add to the list is Connor Williams, who I think could be a good fit. So, but yeah, there's a lot of names. There's actually a lot of those guys from like Rams, 49ers who would be a scheme fit as well. And a lot of them are actually young too. So if they did decide to shore up the position here, it would make sense. I'm with you that I probably wouldn't want to go after like a Brandon Sheriff just because he's over 30. He's always injured, and it's tough to give him like left tackle money. But at the same time, he's an elite guard. So I get it, but at the same time, I'm okay settling for just okay at guard. Yeah. Easier said than done. The Vikings have been trying to settle for cheap but good enough, and have been getting cheap but terrible for years. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully we don't work ourselves into the same trap. And Nick and I, are trying to talk ourselves into the same trap. So maybe Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi will do the same. I guess I kind of want to combine linebacker and safety because they feel the same to me. We talked about how I don't want to make a significant investment in either. I think there are, if you look, it's kind of weird because I was looking at the Broncos free agents and like their entire starting defense last year is a free agent pretty much. It's kind of wild. So I'm pretty interested in the Broncos linebackers bringing over, right? There are actually 3 on the market. Kenny Young started a lot of last year. Alexander Johnson and Josie Jewell were their linebackers in 2020. All 3 of those guys are on the market. I don't think any of them are like really good, going to be high-end starters or anything, but I think they are startable players and they do know the system. And they've performed pretty well in the system previously. If you roll safety into that, there's a ton of high-end safety talent in the market. Tyrann Mathieu, I think, is going to hit the market. There was somebody else. Oh, no. Tyrann Mathieu is going to hit because Orlando Brown got franchise tagged by the Chiefs. And there's a couple other high-end safeties in the market. We have one high-end safety. I don't need a second. But Kareem Jackson, who is very much up there in age, is pretty interesting to me as a player who knows the system and has played very well in the system. He was a corner for most of his career, switched over to safety the last couple of years, and he functioned very well in that Broncos secondary. In that safety role, he's a very cerebral player. Obviously, that gets us older. At the end of the day, I like Cam Bynum. I think he's a developmental player that I'd like to see the field. So other than that, I'm shopping bargain basement. Linebacker, I'm shopping bargain basement just because I don't want to break the bank for anybody because I don't think it's worth it.
Yeah, I agree. I think neither of these positions are worth shelling out for, although I think Anthony Barr is worth paying for just because he's more than just your average inside linebacker. He also has versatility, especially in a 3-4 to do some things. So I'd be willing
here's
to pay.
The question. What are you paying Anthony Barr at this point? Because I'm thinking like his contract was $13 million, right? Like that's what he was making. I'm thinking like 5, maybe.
Yeah, I'd go up to 7-8 million, maybe at the top. It also depends on if we're paying for a top cornerback, we probably don't have the money in the bank for Anthony Barr. So and I would prioritize the cornerback over the linebackers, even though I do really like Anthony Barr. But I mean, he is over 30. He had injury problems, and so I'm not sure he'll have a super strong market, but at the same time, I don't know. You could get surprised, and the Jets obviously really wanted him a lot a few years back, and he's a former first rounder, top 10 pick, so that might carry as well. But so I'm not willing to break the bank for Anthony Barr. There are some safeties out there I like. I think an Anthony Harris reunion could be good. I think he's got some limitations in his game, but he would be really good playing top down in like a split safety coverage shell with the whole Fangio system. I think some of those guys could make sense. At the same time, I am kind of interested to see Cam Bynum and wouldn't mind him being the starter locked in going into next year.
Okay, so any other free agency names that you have? Well, I guess I'll start on this, but other free agency names, I think Akeem Hicks is one that's been thrown out. Obviously, I think he'd be awesome, but to free up space for Akeem Hicks, you're probably cutting Michael Pierce. At which point, I'm like, I don't know how much more value there is there. Michael Pierce is like 28 years old. Akeem Hicks is like 34, 33 or 34. So I really would just go with the younger player who I think is very good at that point, right? So that's kind of my thoughts on Akeem Hicks. There are a couple of other players at that position. Calais Campbell is actually hitting the market. He's old, will probably be expensive, but he'd be that perfect 5 tech in that kind of system. Like he'd be absolutely perfect for that.
Yeah.
And I think he's still a great player, so I wanted to shout him out. Jihad Ward is kind of in that mold in terms of like a really big, long player. I don't know if he's any good, to be honest with you, but he just kind of popped into my head. Anybody else, defensive end, that defensive end position or any other position, let's kind of close it out here on the free agents that popped out to you, Nick.
If they moved on from Kirk Cousins, who would you want to sign as a quarterback free agent to replace him as your bridge or potentially your starter going forward? I
was thinking about this today. I want them to trade for is it Bryce Hopkins or Bryson Hopkins, the backup, the guy who went to UVA who was the backup for the Rams last year. I was thinking about this. I would just trade a low round pick for him and see what we got and try to get like a Tyrod out of it or something. Like I don't love anybody in the free agent market. Like we could get a single year stopgap, but like that's kind of boring. Let's try to create somebody who, and the Rams love that guy, right? So I don't know how much they're going to be willing to part with him, but maybe Kevin's like, hey, look, Sean, you have Matthew Stafford. Like, let's give this guy a shot. I want to give this guy a shot, right? And that's kind of where I'm feeling.
Bryce Perkins for Garrett Bradbury or something.
Yes. Sorry, I mixed him up with Bryson Hopkins, who I think is a tight end. But yeah, Bryce Perkins.
Rams carried him on their 53-man roster all year just because they were so scared of him getting poached. So yeah, that would be fun. I think a Teddy reunion could be fun just for the kicks and giggles.
I'd love a Teddy reunion. I'd break out my jersey immediately.
Yeah, and he's really good at executing this type of West Coast offense. So I think it would make a lot of sense to have him compared to like a Mariota or I mean Andy Dalton would make a lot of sense too as like a discount Kirk Cousins. But yeah, there's they James too. I mean James was doing similar stuff in Sean Payton's West Coast offense. So I mean they changed it a little bit for him, but. I do think the options that are out there would fit if they wanted to, get a 1 year bridge starter to whenever they want to draft their next QB of the future. So
yeah, no, I think Mariota and Winston of the guys who are free agents are like the most intriguing to me, right? And that's pretty much an upside play. I mean, obviously there were the number 1 and number 2 overall picks in that 2015 draft class, right? But Mariota has played pretty well in spot duty since he's been with the Raiders, and Winston is just the volatility. Like, if we're gonna not be a great football team, let's at least have some fun.
There we go. And with that is a perfect note to wind this thing up on. So we are Kindred Skulls. You can find Matt at Matt Fries at Fries Football on Twitter. I'm Nick Olson at Nick Olson NFL. Our co-host Greg is at You've Been Gregged on Twitter or Instagram. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We are also on YouTube. Just search Kindred Skulls. Give us a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. It warms the cockles of my heart. Give us some 5-star reviews because I read them every day and it makes me feel warm and fuzzy when I go to sleep. If you've listened this long, you can close your podcast app now and go give us a review because it makes us happy. So with that, goodbye. We love you. This is my first time ever doing the sign out, so I think I nailed it. I stuck the landing.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, you killed it, man. Skull Vikings.
Go Vikings, bye, we love you.
Corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind. And we'll score.